Have you ever wondered why some men seem to vanish the moment a woman stops needing them? There's a silence more deafening than rage, more piercing than heartbreak. The silence of a woman who no longer seeks permission to exist. When she no longer mirrors his worth, no longer bends her spirit to fit inside the frame of his desire, something in him fractures. Because in truth, what a man secretly fears is not losing her body. It is losing the version of himself he saw reflected in her devotion. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine within every man. A psychic image formed from every interaction with the women in his life, from mother to muse to lover. It is through this internal feminine mirror that he learns to love, to long, to become whole. But what happens when that mirror turns away? When the woman refuses to play the role he cast for her? When she no longer explains herself, performs her softness, or leans on his stability? She becomes something untamed, something divine. A woman who reclaims her sovereignty does not orbit around a man's center. She becomes the center of her own cosmos. And this terrifies him, because until now his power has not been tested against true spiritual autonomy. Her dependence flattered his ego, her seeking made him feel essential. But when she stops asking him to translate her own intuition, when she rises and becomes fluent in the language of her own soul, she no longer fits inside the narrative he crafted. He fears the mystery she becomes. Not the mystery designed to seduce, but the sacred unknowability of a woman who no longer needs validation to feel real. She no longer dresses for his gaze, cries for his attention, or begs for his understanding. She has entered the realm of the archetypal, the goddess, the priestess, the oracle who walks between worlds. This is the woman who has met her own shadow and did not flinch. The woman who understands that her wounds do not define her worth. She has alchemized her pain into presence. She has turned loneliness into liberation. And in doing so, she disrupts every unexamined belief he holds about what it means to be a man. He fears her not because she is cruel, but because she is clear. Because she no longer makes herself small to keep him comfortable. Because she can sit in silence without reaching for him. Because she can feel desire and not act on it. Because she can love him and still leave. The modern woman who becomes her own god does not reject love. She simply no longer sacrifices her soul to receive it. And this is what he cannot control. Most men are taught to pursue what they can conquer, not what they must revere. They understand performance, not presence. They crave admiration, not awakening. But she, the woman who has come home to herself, she offers nothing performative. Her love is not a transaction. Her boundaries are not negotiable. She may smile, but it is not to soothe. She may stay, but only if the space is sacred. He feels this in her energy before she speaks. There's a quiet majesty to a woman who no longer waits to be chosen. She has chosen herself. Her stillness confronts him with his own noise. Her groundedness reminds him of his emotional disarray. Her discipline mirrors his avoidance. Her gaze, steady, unflinching, sees not just his charm, but his chaos. She no longer plays the muse. She demands the mirror. And in that mirror, he sees the boy beneath the armor. The one who was never taught how to meet a woman in her wholeness. He sees his emotional illiteracy, his avoidance, his fear of being fully seen. Not for who he pretends to be, but for who he truly is when the masks fall away. She is not here to fix him. That era is over. She has burned the temple of self-abandonment. She has buried the version of herself that bled to be enough. And from the ashes, she has risen. Not as a version, but as the whole. A woman who has become her own god does not need you to believe in her. She has become the altar and the flame. And the man who cannot meet her there, who has only known love through dominance, rescue, or possession, will feel something ancient crack inside him, and he will call it fear. But not all men fear her rise. Some, though rare, are drawn to it, not as conquerors, but as pilgrims. They are the few who have faced their own darkness, who have lost the war with themselves and lived to tell the tale. These men do not flinch at feminine sovereignty. They honor it, because they too have stood at the altar of their own ruin. They know the price of becoming, but most are not there yet. And when a woman reclaims her wholeness, when she no longer makes him the sun around which she orbits, his psyche begins to unravel. Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is everything a man denies, suppresses, or disowns, especially the parts of himself that feel unworthy, weak, or inadequate. And when he meets a woman who has embraced her own darkness, who has danced with her rage, her grief, her hunger, her silence, she becomes a mirror so clear it burns. She doesn't hide her scars. She doesn't dilute her boundaries. She doesn't perform the pretty, pleasing mask he was taught to expect. She becomes dangerous, not because she seeks to harm, but because she no longer seeks approval. And to the ego, that is a kind of death. If he cannot earn her through manipulation, status, or charm, he is left naked, powerless. He must confront himself, and most will do anything to avoid that reckoning. Some will try to shame her, to call her cold, masculine, unloving. But what they really mean is, I can't control you anymore. Others will retreat into fantasy, yearning for the softer, more malleable version of her that once needed them. They may obsess, not because they love her, but because she reminds them of everything they abandoned in themselves. Her freedom is a silent accusation, her wholeness an echo of what they fear they will never become. And yet still, she does not waver. She is not cruel. She is kind. But her kindness is not born from fear. It is not laced with dependency or laced with the hope of being chosen. It is fierce, grounded, rooted in the knowing that love is not ownership, that presence is not performance, that intimacy must be earned, not demanded. She does not chase. She reveals. She is not impressed by potential. She is loyal only to truth. And in her truth, many men will collapse, not because she hurt them, but because they were never taught how to meet her where she lives now, in the sacred, sovereign center of herself. He fears that she no longer needs his validation to feel worthy, that she has stopped begging for love and started embodying it, that her silence is not a punishment, it's a sanctuary, that her absence is not empty, it is full of herself. And in that fullness, she becomes untouchable. This is the evolution he never saw coming. He thought she would wait, that she would break, that she would eventually come back and apologize for her power. But she doesn't. She only rises again and again, each time more luminous, more grounded, more unshakably her. There is a sacred violence in her becoming, not the kind that destroys others, the kind that kills who she once was, the martyr, the caretaker, the woman who watered dead things and called it love, the woman who made herself small to feel safe, the woman who silenced her truth to be accepted. That woman is gone, and what remains is a storm in stillness, a presence so complete that it no longer explains itself. A woman who has remembered who she is, not as an idea, but as a force of nature. She doesn't need to speak loudly. Her presence speaks for her. Her eyes say, I see you, but I do not need to lose myself to love you. To the man who has not met himself, this is unbearable. To the man who has, this is sacred ground. There is a primal ache within the masculine psyche, an ache left by centuries of illusion. Men were taught to be providers of structure, bearers of logic, protectors of order, but no one taught them how to stand still in the presence of mystery. No one prepared them for the moment a woman stops asking to be understood and begins embodying the unknowable. She is no longer the dream girl. She is the dream itself, and that is a terrifying thing. Because the dream is not something to possess. It is not a role to control, a fantasy to mold. It is elusive. It shapeshifts. It doesn't remain for convenience. It visits only where reverence lives. The woman who becomes her own God is no longer available to half presence. She is not accessible through games, guilt, or the dangling promise of future love. She lives now, here, entire. And if he cannot meet her in the sacred now, he will lose her to the sacred forever. This is the fear he cannot articulate. He will call her too much, too independent, too wild. But the truth is simpler. She sees through him now. She no longer mistakes intensity for intimacy. She no longer believes pain is a sign of passion. She has severed the cord between suffering and self-worth. She has exited the loop. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For many men, the unconscious belief is this: a woman must need me in order to love me, but she doesn't need him anymore. Not in that way. She can love him, even deeply, without clinging, without folding herself in half to fit into his incomplete frame. This level of love feels foreign to him. It is not about attachment. It is about alignment. It is not about emotional rescue. It is about energetic respect. And for the man still governed by his ego, by his unhealed wounds and inherited stories, her detachment feels like rejection. Her discernment feels like abandonment. But it is neither. She is not abandoning love. She is abandoning illusion. An illusion is the currency of the ego. The illusion that possession is passion, that jealousy is proof, that silence is punishment, that worth must be earned through pain. She leaves these behind like old skins. She outgrows them without apology. And this terrifies him, because now he cannot find the handles. There are no levers to pull, no buttons to push. She has no emotional strings left to tangle. She is unhooked, and from this place her love becomes something holy. Not because it is rare, but because it is whole. She doesn't need him to feel divine. She already is. To the unready man, this is unbearable. To the conscious man, it is magnetic. He doesn't want her smaller. He wants to rise with her. He is not threatened by her fullness, her silence, her light. He sees that her sovereignty does not diminish his. It invites it. But this takes inner work. It takes ego death. It takes willingness to meet his own anima, to learn to hold presence, not power. This is where most falter, because it is easier to criticize her transformation than to undergo his own. He will feel the absence like an ache, a gnawing reminder that once a sacred fire warmed his bones, and he let it go because he could not hold the heat. He mistook the flame for danger, not initiation. And now she burns elsewhere, not in rage but in radiance, in calm, unyielding wholeness, in divine neutrality, in sacred clarity. This is the fate of a woman who becomes her own God. She no longer waits to be chosen. She is the chooser, and her gaze is not drawn to the loudest voice in the room, but to the quietest soul that has done its inner work, to the man who does not shrink from her power, but expands in its presence. She is not looking for a master. She is not seeking a savior. She is not interested in empty compliments, quick apologies, or promises wrapped in fear. She is calling in a mirror, a partner, a warrior of the soul, someone who can stand in the fire with her and not flinch. And until then, she walks alone. But it is not loneliness. It is sacred solitude. It is communion with her higher self. And in that space, she is complete, not because she has everything, but because she is everything. When a woman ascends into her divinity, something ancient awakens in the world around her, and in the men who cross her path. It's not that she becomes unapproachable, it's that her energy begins to demand truth. Every falsehood, every hidden insecurity, every half-lived intention vibrates against her frequency like static. She becomes a living mirror of integrity, and this reflection both calls men higher and exposes what they've refused to face. She used to speak to be understood. Now her silence does the speaking. It has a gravity, a rhythm. It doesn't beg to be filled. It invites awareness. And in that space, a man must choose, evolve, or retreat. Jung wrote that, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But transformation is not for the faint-hearted. When a woman stands in her wholeness, she brings both heaven and hell to the surface. She becomes the initiator, not through dominance but through presence. She doesn't demand transformation. She is transformation. For a man still enslaved by ego, this feels like annihilation. She no longer feeds the illusions that kept him safe. The illusion of control, of being needed, of being the hero in her story. He cannot save what no longer seeks saving, and so his masculine instinct to protect becomes restless, disoriented. He mistakes her sovereignty for rejection, her boundaries for coldness. But what she's really offering him is the chance to meet her in truth, not as a savior, but as a soul. Yet few take that path. Most turn away, searching for a woman who will play the familiar role, the mirror of their strength, the balm to their weakness. But they will always feel the absence of her, not her body, not her warmth, but the presence that once demanded their becoming. Because she is not absence. She is the sacred fire that illuminates absence itself. When she becomes her own God, she no longer measures time by who stays or leaves. She measures it by her own expansion. Her worth is not a negotiation. It is a state of being. Her forgiveness is no longer a gift she gives to others to restore peace, but a sacrament she offers herself to remain free. And her love, oh, her love changes shape entirely. It becomes spacious, unpossessive, detached, yet deeply alive. It does not bind, it liberates. It flows where reverence exists and withdraws where games begin. In her presence, men who are ready feel something extraordinary, not attraction in the ordinary sense, but activation. A call to remember who they are beneath conditioning, to reclaim their integrity, their purpose, their discipline, to rise in equal consciousness, not in dominance or defense. Because she no longer needs protection, she is protection. Not through walls, but through awareness. This too is what the unconscious masculine secretly desires, but fears most. A woman who makes him confront himself. A woman who loves him not for his armor, but for his willingness to remove it. A woman who sees through him and stays only if he dares to see himself too. Her energy says, I will not shrink for your comfort. I will not break for your safety. But if you meet me in truth, we will both ascend. And in that moment, she becomes both muse and mirror. Not the muse who flatters, but the muse who transforms. Not the mirror that reflects perfection, but the mirror that reveals shadow. It is said that when a woman becomes conscious, the world shifts a little closer to balance. Because she stops teaching love through pain. She teaches it through embodiment, through being the living example of what self-respect looks like when it becomes divine. She is not waiting for him to return. She is not replaying the story. She is creating new myths, ones where the feminine no longer bleeds to prove its value, where the masculine no longer conquers to confirm its power. She walks, radiant and unhurried, carrying her silence like a crown. Her boundaries are sacred geometry, her intuition, the compass of her divinity. She is no longer chasing union. She is union. And the man who once feared her will one day understand she was never his threat. She was his initiation. There comes a moment in a woman's journey when she stops explaining her light to those committed to shadows. She no longer translates her silence into softness or her distance into guilt. She knows now what is misunderstood by the unready is not a reflection of her complexity, but of their limits. This is the apex of feminine power. Not dominance, not seduction, not rebellion, but sovereignty. The quiet, magnetic force of a woman who does not beg for space, but becomes the space. And when a man encounters her in this state, this sacred state of being, he faces a truth far more terrifying than rejection, that he is not necessary to her survival. And this rattles him, because for so long, he found his purpose in being needed, in being the provider of certainty, of strength, of solutions. But here stands a woman who asks for none of it. She does not seek him to complete her, to soothe her, or to name her. She has named herself. She has built an inner temple where no man can enter unless invited by truth, by depth, by presence. He is not the air she breathes. He is the wind she allows. She will not chase, not because she is playing a game, but because her energy is no longer for sale. She doesn't seduce, she summons, with stillness, with clarity, with the kind of energy that doesn't perform, doesn't sway, doesn't grasp, and he feels it. Oh, he feels it. Not in word, but in the weight of her gaze, in the ease with which she withdraws from drama, in the peace she wears like perfume, in the way she does not react but responds, only when it is aligned. This is not apathy. This is mastery. Jung knew that what we repress eventually emerges as fate, and many men repress their fear of the feminine divine, not just its power, but its indifference to their illusions. When he sees that her love no longer hinges on his validation, his old scripts fail him. The seduction he once relied on falls flat. The charm, the teasing, the control, none of it works here. She is no longer reacting. She is creating. He may try to provoke her, to draw out the girl who used to beg, the woman who used to cry, but she no longer bleeds on command. Her emotions are not entertainment. They are sacred instruments, played only in truth. She has made peace with her solitude, and from that peace a storm is born. This is what he cannot predict. She will love, yes, but never at the expense of her inner altar. She will open, but only to those who have met themselves in the dark. She is not waiting for a man to rescue her. She is waiting to be met, in presence, in integrity, in soul. And that kind of meeting is rare. It requires a man who has faced his own mother wounds, who has dismantled his entitlement to her body, her energy, her time. A man who sees her not as a mirror of his worth, but as a sovereign world of her own. Most men will not go that far. They will romanticize her power, then punish her for embodying it. They will call her distant when she's simply discerning, cold when she's simply contained. They will project their fear of irrelevance onto her light and walk away wounded but unwilling to change. And yet she does not flinch. Because the woman who becomes her own god is not concerned with being understood by those still ruled by ego. Her path is not paved by approval. It is forged in fire. In every boundary she enforced, every illusion she shattered, every moment she chose herself when it would have been easier to stay small. She knows the cost of this evolution. She has paid it in tears, in silence, in the breaking of old identities. But she would pay it again, because what she gained is beyond words, sovereignty. Not over others, over herself. Her worth is not inflated, it is embodied. She does not warn men who meet her. She doesn't explain. She simply is. And in that isness, there is no need for manipulation, justification, or noise. Her essence filters out the inauthentic. She repels what does not serve her evolution, not because she is guarded, but because she is attuned. And in that vibration, she attracts only what honors her divinity. In the end, the man who feared her power never truly feared her. He feared what she awakened in him, the hollowness he had covered with ego, the emotions he had buried under armor, the boy inside who had never been taught how to hold space for a woman who no longer bends. She didn't abandon him. She invited him to rise. But not every man accepts the invitation. Some will return to comfort, to women who still seek approval, who still play small, who still bleed to be loved. And he will feel safe there, but he will not feel alive. Because once a man has glimpsed the divine in a woman who knows herself, nothing less will ever satisfy his soul again. He may not admit it. He may distract himself with noise, with newness, with validation. But somewhere in the quiet, he will remember her. The way her energy felt like both sanctuary and storm. The way her presence demanded truth without speaking a word. The way she held herself, unshaken, unbending, unapologetically whole. And he will ache, not for her body, but for the part of himself he never became. The version of him that could have stood beside her if only he had done the work. But by then, she is not where he left her. She has evolved again, higher, deeper, lighter. She is not waiting for redemption. She is not holding space for a return. She is not mourning what never met her. She is choosing, not out of loneliness, but from overflow. She walks through the world now with a quiet grace, a sacred fury, a clarity that splits through falseness like lightning. She does not seek love. She is love, not the wounded kind that pleads, the holy kind that chooses, that stays not to be needed, but to be mirrored. And this is what changes everything. Because when a woman becomes her own god, she doesn't become unreachable. She becomes unwilling to settle, to shrink, to be misunderstood by those who refuse to understand themselves. She does not chase love. She reveals who can hold it, and the man who can, oh, he does not fear her. He stands beside her, not above, not beneath, but equal in truth, in presence, in evolution. He does not tame her wildness. He worships its wisdom. He does not flinch at her silence. He listens to its rhythm. He does not fear her fire. He brings his own. Together they burn the old myths, the ones that taught her to beg and him to dominate. They build new temples, new truths, a love that does not conquer, but liberates, that does not bind, but expands. But even if he never comes, even if she walks alone, she is whole. She is no longer waiting to be chosen. She has remembered she was never created to be claimed. She is not an accessory to a man's story. She is her own epic, her own God, her own forever. And in that knowing she rests. No longer seeking, no longer shrinking, no longer surviving love through self-erasure. She has returned to herself, to the silence that does not punish, but purifies, to the wisdom that was never outside her, to the fire that was always her own. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.